adjustment and support as part of our employment for learners. And this is just an example to illustrate a point. I showed these pictures to young children from the age of 7 up to the age of 17, who say, how do you think they feel? And people say, she looks happy. And then they say, she's scared, but then they're saying she's excited. And lots of people interpret how they feel this person is differently. Again, is he sad? Is he anxious? One young person said he was very pensive. And again, is she scared or excited or happy? And then a young person said this person had broccoli coming out of their ears. Now, I think the reality is, for me, one of the core elements of improving outcomes for young people, and therefore for adults in employment, is the understanding of masking. I think if we have a culture where people are having to go in and mask to perform, it takes a lot of the coping responses people have available. So the more we can set things up in a way that allow individuals to be themselves, then we have much more resource to do other things and to do the job, in essence. And so there's some fantastic stuff by Dr. Amy Pearson and Kieran Rose, including a great new book on masking, which I think is really important. My view is any institution or setting needs to have a good understanding about it. And the other thing I am very strong on and think is really, really important, please, please, please don't click the smiley face to say you're okay. Because all we're doing is perpetuating that you go smiling, you're all right. How might you actually feel inside? Yeah. We want systems that allow people to be themselves, not things that try and force people to be something else. Okay. So it always makes me go, when I see at the airport, click the smiley face to say you're okay. So if we eliminate all smiley faces, I think we're on the way. The other thing, which I think was part of, if you like, the opening section, was David Milton's double empathy problem, you know, and actually this is a two-way thing. Yeah. So it's not about parking the problem within the autistic person and saying they have to change. It's very much about identifying the environment and the people and the systems to allow those individuals to flourish within it. Okay. And I think it's really, really important that we move away from a deficit model of difference. And one of the things I was very lucky to do in the 1990s when I started teaching with a lot of disability equality work, along the medical model and social model, disability and the like. And I think these things are so important to be part of our discourse now, in essence. So our coping responses determine how we adapt. Some people have fewer coping tools. So what we can do is make things less stressful, so the fewer tools make a bigger difference. Are we happy? You know, I think it's a lot of things are very simple because simple things work, in my view. Okay. And when people like to find a problem for all these solutions, well, you can't do this because, I always say, well, look, you wouldn't say to somebody, you're not allowed to use your wheelchair today. Or, I'm taking your hearing aid off you today. You need to go and do that job and do the coffees for that person. Yeah. Actually, so why would we deny somebody who has a hidden or an invisible disability their coping response by putting systems in place that are stressful for them? Yeah, I think it's a very simple analogy that makes a real difference for me. Okay, so again, understanding the different contexts and situations, I think is really important, and understanding that we need to actively have positive coping strategies as well as reducing stress. Okay, and this is where I see it as a seesaw. Okay, if you are constantly outweighed, the stress outweighs your ability to cope, you might just about manage till the end of the workday, and then there is nothing left, is there? Yeah. So we see it in schools where children just about manage to the end of the day and they get home, kaboom, the moment of dysregulation in the home. Now, this does not help anybody. Big peaks and troughs of stress and dysregulation. We want to look at the whole day and try and keep people more stable, as it were, as far as stress and coping is concerned. And another colleague, a Swedish psychologist, Bo Elven, talks about this line of chaos, where we can't cope. You don't want to be right on the edge of the chaos line because then somebody asks you to do one extra thing, kaboom. We want to keep well below it. Yeah. And what I want to try and do is just highlight a few little examples quickly about things that I've seen that make a difference for that. This was in a school that I worked with in the Middle East, very, very tiny children. And they had a block of learning for 40 minutes and they all got on a little scooter or a bike with a sidecar, cycled round outside, dropped them off, went into the next lesson, the teachers moved around. So what they had was a block movement. Block, movement. Now, I think having that opportunity to break up your job into manageable chunks is really important. If you're in an office space, having that opportunity to do a piece of work and then have a piece of work, bit of movement, I think is really, really important. But from my experience talking with and working with autistic adults, unless we actively plan and say this is how it can happen, some people may feel that they have to just sit there all the time. Yeah, there's many examples from the UK about UK adults working in employment, in jobs, who didn't know that they were allowed to have a day sick or have a day's holiday, and are there all the time, and because nobody's ever questioned it, they never knew this fact. So say, oh, it's brilliant, you've worked every day this year. They didn't know they were allowed to take holiday. Yeah. So let's learn from something I've seen work with very small children and actively, explicitly plan and explain how we can break up the things in the day, but also over the year. When do holidays come in? When do the breaks, to allow that flow for the individual to reduce the stress over time. The other thing we talk a lot about in something called the Atlas program that we do is about things like encouraging people to drink plenty of fluid. Make sure people eat. Yeah, and I think whatever our own journey, many a time we've been involved in work, and then at the end of the day thought, oh, it's 4 o'clock, I haven't eaten yet today, haven't we? Yeah. So actually, again, proactively building these things in and making sure we're explicit about those routines in advance is really, really important. And the other thing I think you can't quite see at the top there, this idea of flow, being in the zone. People do some of their best stuff when they're absolutely in a state of flow, okay? Really matching their skills to that experience, okay? You know, it can happen in social situations as well. But to achieve this, we need the skills and resources to be fully engaged in that. And actually, sometimes not understanding this, we don't get the best outcomes from the people we're employing. So there's a heck of a lot of untapped potential that we would have. And this is just another example of flow. That group of children that I was showing those pictures to, one of the young people who was 8 came up and said to me, I think my flow activity is origami, Gareth. And he went off to get a brisket and a juice at break time. And in the second half, he made about 8 of these whilst he was talking. Yeah. And his dad, who was with him, said he'd never seen him focus so much. If you are doing something, doodling or making an origami thing or whatever, it does not harm you and does not disturb other people. It can help with that focus and flow. So again, we need to have the right environment and the right conversations to say that this is okay. Yeah, because people might have been in a school or a setting where they were told you're not allowed to do that. Yeah, and actually that takes a lot of time to release that stress from the history and the experience you've had. Okay. The other thing I think I was saying is, again, just can't quite see the top, this idea of positive psychology. I think if we have a bad experience, it dominates our time, doesn't it? But actually actively working with employees and actively working with people to say, right, what are 3 good things that have happened today? Let's write these down. Okay, that is fantastic. Yeah, and to reframe that in what we call positive psychology. Things like the PERMA model, I think, about positive recording, moments of happiness, building those meaningful relationships. So again, I would say in employment, like in schools, if we move away from line management, which is about compliance and systems, and more into coaching and supervision, we provide this opportunity. Yeah. So a simple change in dynamic of how we structure things allows us that opportunity to change things differently. And actually, when I think in schools of some of the things that cause a lot of stress to the young people I work with, I think a lot of these things can happen in the workplace too. And I would argue we can do, or somebody who's appropriately qualified, if it's about medication, can do something about all these things. If the workplace is too hot, so therefore somebody is stressing about the heat in that workplace, and so we have a conversation, so let's try and make it cooler, it's something we can do, isn't it? Yeah, I actually think this room is much cooler now. I was very hot before. I don't know what people are thinking. Yeah, I think this is a really important one. Too many rules and restrictions. Have you ever been in those places where there's that many rules on a bit of paper, you're not sure what to do or what not to do? Simple things work best, okay? Making things more complex causes more stress. So the whole key